Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. It started as any ordinary morning, one of those monotonous days where the routine of life feels like a comfortable lull. My wife, Claire, and I had been married for 11 years. The kids, Jeremy and Melissa, were already dressed and sitting at the breakfast table, their backpacks slung over their chairs as they shoveled cereal into their mouths. I leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping my coffee, thinking about the tasks waiting for me at work. Claire was across from me, fussing with her phone like she always did these days, more engrossed in whatever was happening on that screen than in the conversation we used to have. She looked up at me, almost too casually, and dropped a bomb that rattled the very foundation of my world. "By the way, I won't be home tonight. I'm staying out after work." I stared at her, processing the words. Her tone was flat, devoid of any emotion. She might as well have been telling me she was going to the grocery store. But it wasn't her words that caught me off guard, it was the look in her eyes. That distant, faraway gaze, the kind you see in someone who's already made up their mind long before you've even been told. "Staying out?" I asked, not entirely sure if I'd heard her correctly. "Yeah, meeting some friends," she said. Her voice was smooth, rehearsed. "I probably won't be back until tomorrow." Something inside me twisted. The way she said it, how practiced and polished it sounded, it didn't sit right with me. Claire and I had been together for over a decade, long enough for me to know when she wasn't being honest. This wasn't just some night out with friends. There was something more behind that innocent explanation, something that made my stomach churn. I didn't push her for details, though. I nodded, pretending it didn't bother me. "All right. Have fun," I said, my voice calm despite the storm building inside me. She gave me a half-hearted smile, a quick peck on the cheek, and walked out of the kitchen. I watched her leave, feeling the coldness of her kiss linger on my skin. The Claire I married would never have treated me this way, so detached, so distant. But then again, maybe she hadn't been the Claire I married for a long time. I just hadn't noticed until now. Once the kids were out the door, and the house was quiet, I allowed myself to think about what had really been going on these last few months. Claire's late nights, the business trips, the vague explanations for where she'd been and why she was always so tired. My gut told me something was off, but I ignored it, chalking it up to stress, work, life. But that morning, the truth felt closer, like a shadow lurking just behind the corners of my thoughts. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at my coffee as it cooled, and replayed the last few months over in my head. Every little detail, every suspicious moment that I'd brushed aside, now came rushing back with the force of a train I hadn't seen coming. Claire had been distant. That was the only way I could describe it. She was here, physically, but her mind was always somewhere else. Even when we were sitting together on the couch, watching TV, or eating dinner with the kids, she seemed absent. Her phone was always glued to her hand, the screen lighting up with notifications she'd quickly swipe away before I could see who they were from. I hadn't asked. I should've. But I didn't want to be that husband, the paranoid one who snoops through his wife's things, who accuses without evidence. Trust is supposed to be the cornerstone of a marriage, right? So I let it go. Again and again. Now, though, as I sat alone, her words echoed in my head. "I won't be home tonight." There was something dark hidden in that statement, a truth she wasn't telling me. I could feel it, like a cold knot tightening in my chest. Claire wasn't just drifting away. She was already gone. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting, that this was just a phase, maybe a midlife crisis. We'd been through rough patches before. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this time was different. Claire hadn't mentioned who these friends were or where they were going. And I didn't ask, because part of me already knew. A memory flashed through my mind. Weeks ago, her phone had buzzed with a text while she was in the shower. I glanced at the screen, curious, only to see a message from someone named Nick. I'd never heard her mention a Nick before. But it wasn't the name that bothered me. It was the tone of the message, the familiar way it was written. "Can't wait to see you tonight," it had said. At the time, I'd brushed it off. I'd convinced myself it was harmless, maybe a coworker or an old friend. But now, that message felt like a warning I hadn't heeded. Nick. He was more than just a name on a screen. He was real. And my wife was with him right now. The next morning, Claire came home. I didn't ask her where she'd been. I didn't have to. The guilt in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She kissed me on the cheek, just like she had the day before, and went about her routine as if nothing had happened. But things had changed. I had changed. I spent the next few days doing what I should have done months ago, looking into her life. Her phone, her emails, the credit card statements. It was all there, the evidence of her betrayal laid out in cold, hard facts. Claire wasn't just cheating on me. She was living a whole other life. Trips to hotels I'd never heard of, dinners charged to her card that didn't match up with her supposed work schedule. And then there was Nick. The man she had been seeing behind my back, while I was home taking care of our kids, clueless. Anger boiled in me, hot and unrelenting. But instead of confronting her, I waited. I needed a plan. Claire thought she could fool me, but she didn't realize who she was dealing with. Revenge, I knew, was a dish best served cold. I kept quiet, playing the role of the loving husband, all the while gathering every scrap of evidence I could find. I wanted to destroy her, not just emotionally, but legally. The kids, the house, our finances, I was going to take everything from her, just like she had taken everything from me. Days turned into weeks as I built my case. I knew what I had to do. Claire had no idea what was coming. She still walked around the house with that same casual air, as if nothing was wrong, as if she could keep her secret life hidden forever. But secrets have a way of coming to light, and hers was about to be exposed in the worst possible way. The night of our big family dinner, I put my plan into action. That night of the family dinner, I knew everything would change. The evidence I had meticulously gathered over the past few weeks weighed heavy in my mind. The dinner was a routine we hadn't broken even during our roughest times. Claire had arranged it with her usual charm, sending out invitations to her parents and my brother's family, planning the menu down to the last detail. She was still playing the role of the perfect wife, oblivious to the storm that was about to hit. I sat across from her at the table, watching her as she laughed and chatted with the kids, as if nothing had happened. It took everything in me not to let my anger show, not to lash out in front of everyone. But I kept my face calm, steady, just as I had trained myself to do over these weeks. In a strange way, I felt powerful. I was in control now. Claire didn't realize it, but the life she had built around her was crumbling, and I was the one holding the wrecking ball. Dinner went smoothly, as these things always did. Her parents talked about their upcoming vacation, my brother teased me about the lawnmower I had bought but never used, and the kids, blissfully unaware of the tension between their mother and me, chattered about their day at school. It was almost too perfect, the kind of night that used to make me feel grateful for the life we'd built together. Now, it felt like a charade, a hollow performance we were all putting on for no one's benefit. When dessert was served, that's when I made my move. The moment I had been preparing for. "Claire," I said, interrupting the light-hearted conversation at the table. "I have something to discuss with you. In private." She blinked, caught off guard by the sudden seriousness in my tone. I saw a flicker of something in her eyes, confusion, maybe worry, but she quickly masked it with that same calm smile she always used when she thought she had everything under control. "Sure," she said lightly, wiping her hands on her napkin and standing up. "We can talk after dinner." "No," I said, my voice firm. "Now." The table fell silent. Her parents exchanged a glance, and my brother gave me a curious look. But no one said anything. Claire hesitated, her fingers tightening around the napkin, but then she nodded. "All right," she said quietly. "Let's go." I led her into the living room, the soft hum of conversation from the dining room fading as we walked. She followed me, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor. I could feel her eyes on me, trying to read my mood, trying to figure out what was going on. She knew something was wrong, but she didn't know how deep it went. Once we were alone, I turned to face her. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She stood there, her arms crossed, a mask of patience over her face. She was waiting for me to speak, to say something that she could deflect with her well-practiced excuses. "I know about Nick," I said, my voice low but steady. "I know everything." Her reaction was immediate. The color drained from her face, her eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. But then, just as quickly, she regained her composure. She was good at that, hiding behind that calm exterior. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice even. "Nick? Whose?" "Don't," I cut her off, stepping closer. "Don't lie to me, Claire. I've seen the messages. The hotel receipts. I know you've been seeing him behind my back for months." She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for the right words. But there were no words that could fix this. She knew it, and I knew it. The truth hung heavy in the air between us, undeniable. I can explain," she stammered, her voice cracking. "It's not what you think, It's exactly what I think," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "You've been cheating on me, Claire. Lying to me, to our kids. All those nights you said you were working late, all those business trips, you were with him." Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered, tears welling up. It got out of control. But I never wanted to hurt you. I swear, it didn't mean anything. It meant enough for you to lie to me," I said coldly. "To throw away everything we had." She broke down then, sobbing quietly into her hands. I watched her cry, feeling nothing but the cold satisfaction that had been brewing in me for weeks. She had ruined our marriage, and now, she was facing the consequences. "I'm sorry," she choked out between sobs. "I'm so sorry. Please, just give me another chance. We can fix this. I'll stop seeing him. I'll do whatever it takes. Just, please." Her desperation hit me like a wave, but it wasn't enough to soften my resolve. The damage was done. I had already made up my mind. "No," I said, my voice hard as steel. "We're done, Claire. You've made your choice, and now I'm making mine." Her eyes widened, panic flooding her face. "No, please, don't say that. Don't do this. Think about the kids. Think about us." "I am thinking about them," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I'm thinking about how you've lied to them, just like you lied to me. I'm thinking about how you've been selfish, only caring about your own needs while we've been at home, waiting for you." She took a step toward me, reaching out as if to touch me, but I stepped back, putting more distance between us. "Please, let me explain," she begged. "I'll make it right. I'll do anything." I shook my head. "It's too late for that, Claire. I've already filed for divorce." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. For a moment, she didn't seem to understand. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out, as if her brain was struggling to catch up with what I had just said. Finally, she found her voice. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, you can't. You can't just." "I can," I said, cutting her off. "And I have." The papers will be delivered to you tomorrow. The devastation on her face was immediate, raw. Her shoulders slumped, and she collapsed onto the couch, sobbing uncontrollably. I watched her, feeling nothing but a strange, hollow satisfaction. This was what she deserved. I left her there, crying in the living room, and walked back to the dining room where our family was still sitting, unaware of the storm that had just passed through. I forced a smile as I sat back down, taking a sip of my drink. "It's all taken care of," I said, my voice steady once again. They didn't ask questions. Claire didn't come back to the table that night, and no one seemed to notice. But I knew, in that moment, that my marriage was over. And there was no going back. I had started something that couldn't be undone. When I woke up the next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Claire hadn't come to bed. Not that I expected her to. I had left her sobbing in the living room after I'd told her about the divorce, and I hadn't bothered to check on her after that. She had made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. I got dressed and headed downstairs. The coffee maker was already running, filling the kitchen with its familiar hum. Claire was standing by the counter, staring out the window. She hadn't heard me come in, and for a moment, I just watched her. Her shoulders were slumped, her usually flawless appearance disheveled. She looked nothing like the confident woman who had told me she was staying out the night before. Now, she looked broken. I almost felt a pang of guilt, but I shoved it down. I had no reason to feel sorry for her. She had brought this on herself. "Morning," I said, my voice flat as I walked past her to grab a mug. Claire flinched, startled by my presence. She turned to face me, her eyes red and swollen from crying all night. For a second, she opened her mouth as if she was going to say something, but then she closed it again, her gaze dropping to the floor. I poured myself some coffee, deliberately taking my time. I didn't know what I expected her to say, or if I even wanted to hear it. Part of me wanted her to beg for forgiveness, to grovel at my feet and admit that she had ruined everything. But another part of me, the part that had already detached from this marriage, didn't care anymore. It was over. "Are you really going through with it?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer right away. I took a sip of my coffee, leaning against the counter as I studied her. She looked fragile, like a glass vase teetering on the edge of a shelf, waiting to shatter. I could end it all right now, tell her that I had changed my mind, that we could try to fix things. But that wasn't going to happen. I had made my decision, and I wasn't going to back down. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "The papers will be delivered today. I told you last night, Claire. We're done." She swallowed hard, blinking back tears. "But, the kids," she said, her voice breaking. "What about Jeremy and Melissa? We have to think about them, Mark. Please, for their sake, can't we at least try? The kids. Of course, they would come up. They had been the only reason I had tried to make things work after I first suspected Claire was having an affair. For months, I had told myself that I needed to keep our family together, to protect Jeremy and Melissa from the fallout. But now I realized that staying together for them would only make things worse. They deserved better than this charade we had been living. "I've already thought about them," I said coldly. "And this is what's best for them. They need to see what happens when someone betrays the people they're supposed to love." Her face crumpled again, and she took a shaky step toward me. "Mark, please. I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But I love you. I love our family. I'll do anything to fix this. Just give me another chance." I shook my head, setting the coffee mug down with a thud. "No, Claire. I'm not going to put myself through this anymore. You lied to me. You cheated on me. There's no coming back from that." "But it didn't mean anything," she cried, her voice desperate. "I was stupid, I was lonely. I don't even know why I did it, but it's over now. I'll never see him again. Please, Mark. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll quit my job. It's too late, I cut her off, my voice cold as ice. You think quitting your job is going to fix this? You think saying sorry is going to undo everything you've done? Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She stood there, tears streaming down her face, shaking her head as if trying to deny the reality of what was happening. I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret. Just a hollow emptiness where my love for her used to be. I can't believe you're doing this, she whispered. After everything we've been through, you're just going to throw it all away. I'm throwing it away. I laughed bitterly. You did that, Claire. Not me. You threw it away when you decided to start screwing some guy behind my back. Don't try to blame this on me. She flinched at my harsh words, her hands trembling as she wiped her tears away. For a moment, we just stood there in silence, the weight of our shattered marriage hanging in the air between us. I didn't know what else to say. There was nothing left to talk about. Finally, Claire spoke again, her voice hoarse. So, what happens now? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what came next. We figure out the logistics. The house, the kids, everything. But that's it, Claire. There's nothing else between us. She nodded, her eyes glassy with tears she couldn't stop. Okay, she whispered, her voice so small I almost didn't hear it. Without another word, I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I couldn't stand to be in the same room with her any longer. The woman I had loved, the mother of my children, was gone. And all that was left was a broken stranger I didn't recognize. The divorce papers came that afternoon. Claire didn't say a word when the process server handed them to her. She just stood there, staring at the envelope in her hands as if it weighed 1,000 pounds. I watched from the living room, not bothering to get up. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, she sat down across from me at the dining table. For the first time in weeks, we weren't yelling or fighting. It was strange, the quiet tension that filled the room. We both knew what was coming, but neither of us wanted to be the one to say it out loud. I guess we need to talk about the house, she finally said, her voice thick with emotion. I nodded. Yeah. I'll be keeping it. She blinked, clearly taken aback by how easily I had claimed it. But, where will I go? I don't have anywhere else. That's not my problem, Claire, I said, my voice cold. You can stay here until we figure out a plan, but I'm keeping the house. It's better for the kids, and you know it. She nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of the divorce papers. And the kids? How are we going to tell them? That was the part one dreaded the most. Telling Jeremy and Melissa that their mother had destroyed our family, that their lives were about to be turned upside down. But it had to be done. We'll sit them down tomorrow, I said, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. We'll explain everything. Together. She looked at me, her eyes filled with guilt and remorse. I'm so sorry, Mark. For everything. I didn't respond. Sorry didn't matter anymore. It was too late for apologies, too late for second chances. Claire had made her choices, and now we were living with the fallout. She stood up, clutching the divorce papers in her hands. I'll go to bed, she mumbled, not meeting my eyes. Good night. Good night, I said, my voice distant. I watched her walk up the stairs, her steps slow and heavy, as if the weight of what she had done was finally crushing her. Part of me wanted to feel something, anger, sadness, even relief, but all I felt was an emptiness, a numbness that had settled deep inside me. I sat there for a long time, staring at the darkened room around me, thinking about everything that had led us to this point. The lies, the betrayal, the nights I had spent lying awake, wondering where my wife was and who she was with. It was over now. The papers were signed, and there was no going back. But as I sat in that empty room, I realized that the hardest part was yet to come. The next morning, I woke up feeling as though I was walking through a fog. I had barely slept, my mind swirling with what was ahead. Today was the day we would tell the kids about the divorce. Claire and I had agreed to sit them down together after breakfast. I could hardly stomach the thought of it, of watching their faces as they realized their whole world was about to change, that their family was breaking apart. I had wanted revenge, but now, as the reality of it set in, the victory felt hollow. I got dressed slowly, dragging out each minute, trying to delay the inevitable. When I finally made my way downstairs, I found Claire already sitting at the kitchen table. Her face was pale, and her eyes were swollen, as if she had spent the entire night crying. She was clutching a cup of coffee in her hands, but it was untouched, just sitting there, forgotten. The divorce papers were still on the table where she had left them the night before, a stark reminder of everything that had happened. The kids were still upstairs, their laughter drifting down the hall as they got ready for the day, completely unaware of what was coming. "Are you ready?" I asked quietly, sitting down across from her. My voice came out more strained than I intended. Claire didn't look at me. She just nodded, staring at the table. "As ready as I'll ever be." We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of the moment pressing down on both of us. I glanced at the divorce papers again, wondering if I had made the right decision after all. I had wanted her to feel the pain she had caused me, but now, sitting here in the aftermath, all I felt was a deep sense of loss. Everything we had built was crumbling, and once we told the kids, there would be no undoing it. "Mark," Claire whispered suddenly, her voice fragile. "Before we tell them, I need to say something." I looked at her, surprised. There was a vulnerability in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time, and for the briefest moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. Not the Claire who had betrayed me, but the Claire I had once trusted with my heart. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I've said it before, but I need you to know. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, or the kids, or—" She stopped, her breath catching as she struggled to find the words. "I was just so lost. And I don't know how I got there." I stayed silent, listening as she poured out her heart. For the first time since the affair had come to light, I could hear the sincerity in her voice, the genuine remorse that I hadn't believed before. But it didn't change anything. The damage was already done. "I know you won't forgive me," she continued, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But I need you to understand that it wasn't about you. It was never about you. It was about me, and how broken I was. I thought I could find something outside of us that would fix me, but all I did was destroy everything." Her words cut deep, but I didn't know how to respond. I had spent so long feeling angry, betrayed, that I hadn't let myself think about why she had done it. Now, hearing her speak like this, the anger that had fueled me for so long began to dissipate, leaving only sadness in its place. "I'm sorry too," I said quietly, surprising myself. I should have seen how unhappy you were. Maybe if I'd paid more attention." "No," Claire interrupted, shaking her head. "Don't do that. This isn't your fault. It's mine." We sat in silence again, the tension between us replaced by a heaviness that neither of us could shake. We were both grieving in our own way, grieving the loss of our marriage, of the life we had built together. And even though I had been the one to push for the divorce, I couldn't help but feel the weight of that decision crushing me. The sound of footsteps on the stairs broke the moment. The kids were coming down, still laughing and oblivious to what awaited them. I looked at Claire, and she nodded. "Let's do this." Jeremy and Melissa came into the kitchen, beaming as they talked about their plans for the weekend. They grabbed their cereal and sat down at the table, completely unaware of the storm brewing. "Mom, Dad, can we go to the park later? Jeremy asked, his voice bright with excitement. Claire and I exchanged a glance. I felt my chest tighten, the words I needed to say suddenly catching in my throat. Kids, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Your mom and we need to talk to you about something important. Melissa, always the more perceptive one, frowned. What's going on? Claire cleared her throat, her hands shaking as she reached across the table for their hands. Mommy and Daddy, we're not going to be living together anymore. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. Jeremy looked confused, his brow furrowing as he tried to make sense of what he was hearing. But Melissa, her face crumpled instantly, tears welling up in her eyes. No, she whispered, shaking her head. No, you're lying. You're not splitting up. I'm so sorry, Claire said, her voice breaking. We just can't be together anymore. Melissa burst into tears, her small body shaking as she cried. Jeremy, still confused, looked at me for answers, his eyes wide with fear. Why? He asked, his voice trembling. Why can't you stay together? I tried to explain it as gently as I could, but how do you explain something like this to your children? How do you make them understand that their whole world is falling apart and that there's nothing they can do to stop it? As the kids cried, Claire and I sat there, helpless. The pain in their eyes was unbearable, and for the first time since all of this began, I felt a deep, gnawing sense of regret. Maybe I had been too quick to push for the divorce. Maybe I should have tried harder. Maybe. Before I could finish the thought, Melissa stood up suddenly, her face twisted in anger. This is your fault, she screamed at Claire. You're the one who ruined everything. I hate you. Melissa, no, I said, reaching out to her, but she pulled away, running from the table and up the stairs, slamming her bedroom door behind her. Jeremy, his face pale with shock, sat frozen in his chair, staring down at his cereal. Claire was crying now, sobbing quietly as she buried her face in her hands. I wanted to comfort her, to say something that would make this all better, but there was nothing I could do. Suddenly, the weight of everything, the betrayal, the anger, the divorce, the pain we had just caused our children, came crashing down on me, and I felt the tears burning in my eyes. I had wanted revenge, but all I had done was destroy my family. Later that night, after the kids had finally calmed down, I went to check on Claire. I found her sitting on the edge of the bed in the guest room, staring at the wall. I don't think I can do this, she whispered, her voice broken. I don't think I can live without them. I didn't know what to say. All I knew was that the woman in front of me was no longer the enemy I had built up in my mind. She was just as broken as I was. Maybe even more. That night, I heard the sound of glass shattering, and when I rushed to the guest room, I found her slumped on the floor, an empty pill bottle beside her. The ambulance came too late.